Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. For more than 4 decades, Dr. Jean Antoine-Dunne has been a disability activist since the birth of her daughter. Now, she helped create the network and outreach for Disability Education and Sensitization, NODE, in 2014. Dr. Antoine-Dunne, she joins us before the April 21 conference, while the call for contributions are still open. Dr. Antoine-Dunne, thank you so much for making the time. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very far away. And it's lovely to be speaking to somebody in sunny Trinidad.
And the pleasure is ours. And I'm grateful to have this conversation while the call for contributions are still open. So with that in mind, though, give us an idea. It's a one-day conference. It happens on the 21st of April. But what is the overall theme and what is the intention of it?
Okay, inclusive. We're talking about inclusion, disability matters, inclusive futures, transformative structures. That's the theme of the conference. And what we are looking for, what we were looking for was, we were looking for papers that would speak to the idea specifically of inclusion, and that we were also looking for papers that would speak to the notion of how does one enable the capacity of a person with a disability? What kind of structures do you need to put in place? How does one transform society?
And I like that nuance or that distinction of transformation, because sometimes it seems as though there are solutions that are stopgap at best. Okay, they will fill the need or the gap for one person, but they're not necessarily transformative. Give me your take on that. Thank you. How important was it that the word transformation was included in this?
Well, I think that in Trinidad and Tobago, probably because I live and have lived in two places for a very, very long time, I think that I have begun to realize, I actually began to realize when I returned to Trinidad in 2005, January, that Trinidad has great will, great intention, but somehow we lack the capacity to actually transform that will into action. So that there are many, many people in Trinidad and Tobago who are working for the welfare, for the good, for the integration of persons with disabilities. But thus far, we have not been able to change the law. We have not been able to put structures in place that would actually transform the lives of people with disability. We still have this charitable idea that a person with a disability is somebody we help, we give money to, we feel sorry for them, we feel sorry for the mother. And these things, that is part of the transformative process. We have to change the way people see, and we have to change the law itself.
And I'm grateful you speak about that intention, because sometimes there's a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but not necessarily taking those incremental steps and carrying it forward. Sometimes it leaves you right where you are, saying, okay, well, we should do this, but it hasn't been done. And speak to the law, please. What are some of those things that you specifically suggest would change to help this carry this forward?
I was actually reading the Immigration Act just before we came on air, just before you began recording. And that Immigration Act still there's a prohibition against imbeciles and idiots and people with mental disorders. And that is in the Act. That is law. I mean, I don't suppose anybody actually does it. And the reason that it is there is because they can be a burden on society. But the very fact of the language in itself, we have still not changed our language. And that language such as that should be part of our law or legal system, to me, is horrific. Okay? So the law itself, and there is also the Equal Opportunity Act. And I have always found that one of the problems about the equal opportunity, and I've written quite a lot about this in my Newsday columns, is that it contains this phrase, unjustifiable hardship. So if an employer is unjustifiably, is going to be made to suffer in some way, he or she does not need to hire somebody who has a disability. And we're talking about all different types of disabilities. And I can tell you one thing, one of the most, first you have education, but the second thing is having a job. If you are a disabled person, if you're a person with a disability, whether it's an intellectual disability, whether it is a physical disability, what you want to do is to have a job, to have a career, to be given the means to it. And yes, there will have to be structures put in place. That's where the transformation comes in. We all need a little bit of help sometimes. And one needs to know that simply because a person is has some form of impairment, that does not mean that he or she should be excluded from that kind of right. But we also don't really have any what I call positive laws. So there, in fact, one of the panels that we will have on the day is a panel from the Disability Legislation Working Group, which is seeking actively, and is chaired by Paul Richards, who has been one of our great advocates, Senator Paul Richards. And what they are seeking to do is to identify the kinds of laws that should, in fact, be enacted, to look at the many, many gaps, because there is actually no Disability Act in Trinidad and Tobago. But we have signed the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But that hasn't really changed anything fundamentally, as far as I can see.
So we have about 3 minutes more on this side of the conversation, but there are 3 points that you raised that I want to follow up on in no particular order. One, allies, persons who are helping to take this forward. In the same breath, you spoke about Senator Paul Richards, who's going to be moderating a panel. So what are some of the other panels? And then that turn of phrase in the Equal Opportunity Act, unjustifiable hardship.
Hardships.
It seems to speak to the heart of the need for infrastructure to be built around individuals so that they can be their best selves. So I want to know what it is you think on any of those points. We'll follow them as we're able to on the side of the
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Well, one of the things that has happened in many parts of the world and of the developed world is that governments put incentives in place. So, for example, in Ireland, I can speak to Ireland because I have actually been the convener for the Green Party policy group that just presented its policy document on disability. So what government does is says, if an employer hires a person with an intellectual disability for 21 hours, the government will pay 60% of that salary, because it is recognized that a person with a disability may take twice as long to do a job. Now, my daughter can do many jobs, many tasks, and many people with Down syndrome and autism and all kinds of different forms of disabilities can do many, many jobs, but they take a wee bit longer. So what the government says, we're not going to put an unbearable hardship on the employer. We will actually give you a leg up, okay? So that's an incentive. You also have things like job coaches, okay? But of course, the other problem in Trinidad and Tobago is that, and I know this wasn't part of your question, but it's an important point nonetheless to make, is that we have not as yet reached the point where we see people with intellectual disabilities in particular as being part of our mainstream culture, part of the mainstream of society. And the first step to that is, in fact, to include people within the education system, within mainstream education, which means the government then has to put in place special needs teachers, has to pour money into it, has to provide special aids, special assistance. And it takes a great deal of thought, though the expertise is there. When I was in Trinidad before I retired from UWI, many of my students said to me they had been trained in special ed, but they couldn't get a job. They couldn't get a job. So it isn't that there are not people who want to do it, but their skills are not being utilized. And of course, all primary school teachers, I imagine, and all secondary school teachers should in fact be given some basic training in, if you want, the rights and the wealth and the capacity of persons with all forms of disabilities. So those are some of the kinds of structures, some of the transformations that I think need to happen within society.
And I think this is the point we'll take a short break at. We're speaking with Dr. Jean Antoine-Dunne. We're talking about a one-day conference on disability and so much more. Stay with us. We'll return after this. Welcome back. We are continuing a conversation looking at work of the Network and Outreach for Disability Education and Sensitization nodes. We're doing so with founder Dr. Jean Antoine-Dunne. And I really appreciate the fact that this conversation is, yes, we're talking about the day in question, and I feel like we got a little sneak peek into some of the panels that may be taking place, but it also is a little, it encompasses a little more. So it's very interesting. You talk about primary school educators in general should have an idea of how to deal, have some tools, some resources to deal with individuals who have intellectual limitations in the traditional sense. I say traditional sense because sometimes what maybe people call a closed door or window on one hand opens up limitless possibilities on the others. But is it a matter of saying, okay, well, this is the toolkit that I have. My tools are a bit rusty. How do I shine them up? How do I sharpen them up? And that begs the question, who is the ideal person to attend this conference on the 21st?
I hope as many teachers as possible, as many persons, but in particular, as many persons who have various forms of disability as possible. Ian Danielal, who's one of the leaders of DEAF Deaf, Ben Braithwaite, I'm pretty sure that persons from the deaf community will be there, because one of the things about the deaf community is that they insist that, first of all, that English is a foreign language to them, so that I didn't know this until I interviewed Ian and Ben. So that these are things that teachers need to know. Persons who are deaf, persons who are blind, persons who have intellectual disabilities, persons who have autism, we would like all the various segment or sections of the disability community to be there, but we would like professionals to be there. There is actually a panel on astronomy and disability. Professor Shirin Hack, who is actually one of our founding members, has founded this, I call it Pan-Caribbean group, which has identified that people with disabilities have been excluded from technology, engineering, astronomy. So what her panel will speak to would be the ways in which persons with disabilities can be included, but also how that kind of knowledge, that kind of scientific knowledge, astronomy, can be in fact used to enable persons with disabilities to have more proactive lives, to have better lives. We have also got a panel on, if you want, academic matters, research done by academics. Adana James, who has done a PhD on Edouard Glissant, and disability, which is very exciting, a very, very exciting idea. Professor Paula Morgan, who has been working on trauma. She's going to be delivering a paper. We have Roseanne Walker, who has done her PhD on a blind poet. So these are people who have been working for many, many years in an academic context on the ways in which persons are represented, persons who are disabled are represented, but also the ways in which persons with disabilities can in fact be part of society in not just an enabling, but in a very productive way.
You say Glissant, and all I think about is the right to opacity. So you have me getting even more excited about
I am excited.
But how do individuals contribute? So you're talking about these panels, but if someone has something to say, because I know one of the things that Nodes is about is self-representation on the part of persons with disabilities. How do individuals make contributions? What channels do they send them to say, I want some of these thoughts to be shared on the panel?
Well, we have a Nodes website. We also have a mobile number, which is 792-7622. We have a landline, which is 645-9670. And we will be accepting not just contributions, anybody who registrations through this particular medium, or these media, in fact. Anybody can also contact me at jantoine5@outlook.com or jacqueline.huggins@sta.uwi.edu. But the website is going to be one of our prime, and I also have a Facebook page, which we haven't utilized as much as we should, but which I hope to, in fact, make bigger and better. So any of these individuals or any of these methods or mechanisms will enable you to come into contact with us, share your thoughts. We want as many people there as possible. We want professionals, teachers, students. We would like secondary school students to be there, because I believe, as do many of the people involved in this, that if young people, children, as they're growing up, if they come into contact with persons with disabilities, a lot of the silly stereotypes and ideas that exist now will disappear. But of course, we also, one of the reasons I would like to target schools is that we, as you know, I think everybody recognizes that Trinidad is very much a mind culture. I was, as you know yourself, I come from a very academic family. We were brought up to believe the only thing that matters is brains and passing exams. But I think it's a very important lesson for all people to understand and to learn that there are many different types of people in the world, many different talents, and many different capacities.
And looking at how we engage with each other, how radical to you is the thinking that it is society that disables?
I think that the UN Convention is very much founded on that idea, because we may have an impairment, but for example, let's go to the wheelchair. So if I'm in a wheelchair and I'm or in my wheelchair going down the road and I meet a crack in the road, then I can't use my wheelchair properly. That's a very pragmatic way of looking at it. If my daughter has a job and she's treated badly, or she can't get a job, it's society that's saying to her, you don't have the capacity to do something. So that society has to actually actively and positively enable and not put up barriers. You see, long ago, we looked at it from the medical perspective. People needed to be fixed. I don't think any disability activist even thinks that anymore. Persons with disabilities, many of them, my daughter was interviewed recently on RTE, Irish television, for World Down Syndrome Day, and she was asked, one of the questions that she was asked was, how do you think that people see you or see Down syndrome? Do you think it needs to be changed? And she says, I like having Down syndrome. She does. She doesn't want to be changed. People with autism say autistic because they don't want to be fixed, okay? They don't want to be fixed. They just want society to give them a chance to show their capacity, their capabilities, their abilities. And that's what I think is a lesson that we need to get from this.
And in the final 45 seconds, we have Dr. Antoine-Dunne. What are some of the things that you want to come out or to be sparked by this conference?
But first of all, the conference, the papers, some of the papers will be published in Tutmoon. That is our Faculty of Humanities online journal. I would like very much people to start. I'm an agitator, I'm sorry. I've always been an agitator. I was saying recently when I was a UWI student, we used to close down the campus. I love people to be actively agitating for change. I want young people to become incensed when they see inequalities. I want young people to say, I embrace persons who are different, because I think it was Stuart Hall who says that the coming problem of the 21st century is in fact the problem, the issue of difference, acceptance of difference. I want people to come out of this conference saying, we are all different, but we are all human. We all have rights. Give us our rights. And everybody needs to enable that right or those rights.
And with that, we want to say thank you so much. Yeah, and I agree with you in the sense that conflict is needed. Otherwise, it's easier for the status quo to just remain. I mean, there's a saying is only when breeze blow you see fall boom see, which I guess speaks to that in a slightly different energy. But we want to thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the work that you continue to do. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.